Yeah, good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for the warm welcome. The last presentation before the coffee break, actually, and please stay with me. The topic is difficult, but I try to make it interesting. So, hate speech has been discussed throughout the world for a couple of years now, and internet users, and indeed we citizens, have developed our ways how to deal with it. Some use it, some ignore it, some stand up and speak up against it. However, I'm sure you'll agree that hateful remarks are always bad for a discussion, and they can also be the reason for others to remain silent. Today, I'd like to speak about some observations in Germany, the concept of free speech and its limits, and also how civil society reacts to haters on the internet. In our free and democratic societies in Europe, we enjoy freedom of speech and freedom of expression as essential and indispensable values. These freedoms are guaranteed in all of our constitutions. The concept of freedom of speech is maybe perfectly summed up by this quote: "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." Though these words are regularly attributed to Voltaire, they are first used by English writer Evelyn Beatrice Hall in The Friends of Voltaire as a summation of Voltaire's beliefs of freedom of thought and freedom of expression. In its purest form, we find this concept of freedom of speech in the United States of America. Still today, you have to add, and let's see how long this will last. The freedom of speech is an elementary principle that virtually tops everything else. There are basically no limits to the freedom of speech in the United States. And as a concept, it is somewhat comparable to our concept of human dignity as laid out in European constitutions. We find this concept of human dignity as being free of limits in the Polish constitution, in the German constitution, and also in the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union. So let's take a look how it's formed in the German constitution, this concept of freedom of speech. The Article 5 goes like this. It basically explains that everybody has the right to freely express their views and opinions and also to inform themselves free of limits. It guarantees the freedom of press and of course states that there shall be no censorship. About the same formulation is also found in the Polish constitution, so it's not really a surprise. A bit of a surprise is the second subparagraph in this article in the German constitution, where immediately it names limits to the freedom of speech. And these limits also include the laws for the protection of minors. And this comes somewhat as a surprise, as such a high value of freedom of expression can be limited by all sorts of laws and also by the laws for the protection of children and young people. So, do we live now in a very problematic country in Germany? Is it really that bad there? You see here a mock-up town sign which reads, "You are entering Germany, the end of freedom of expression." Well, maybe it isn't really that bad. To sum it up, this legal concept: every expression which is not prohibited by a law is allowed. And on the other hand, any expression which is prohibited by a constitutional law does not deserve protection and may be banned. Okay, the scene is set. Let's take a look what this means for hate speech. I am a lawyer by training, and so I'd like to find legal answers to questions. Maybe I can begin with looking at what constitutes criminal hate speech from a legal perspective, or from a criminal law perspective. What makes hate speech? Of course, insults and defamation. This is maybe the first things that come to mind when you think about hate speech online. As a bit of a German peculiarity, there are laws against propaganda material and symbols of unconstitutional organizations like swastikas or other Nazi symbols, and also the denial or downplay of the Holocaust, which are prohibited by the German criminal code. And we find such material quite frequently when we talk about hate speech in Germany. And also the incitement to crime or the incitement to hatred, these are categories or criminal laws, if you will, that constitute hate speech. And last not least, maybe also the laws for the protection of minors have contain some ideas of or contain limits to the freedom of speech, which could, on the other hand, define or constitute hate speech. So having taken this legal approach, we quickly find out that this is maybe not enough to really grasp what hate speech is, and most importantly, what to do about it. So maybe we should try and take a broader look, and maybe I call it a societal approach, because hate speech obviously is not only a legal term, and it needs a broader discussion, and not only by lawyers, of course. Hate speech consists of many different phenomena of group-focused hostility, and some of the characteristics are discrimination, also coarse language or very rough language can be named as characteristics of hate speech. Conspiracy theories, a great thing, very well popular in Germany. I have no idea about how it is here in Poland, but there are many people who actually claim that the German Reich still exists, and that we live in an unconstitutional land in this Germany. And also a lot of conspiracy theories range about what the government does to us, and how they secretly try to poison us and everything. And people actually believe this and publish their thoughts on this. I added unfair generalization and the exclusion of certain groups, which is rather often seen in the context of hate speech, based on their religious beliefs or on sexual orientation, or even on the color of their skin. On the last line, I added the verbal assaults against the so-called liar press, which is a term that's made popular around the globe by a certain orange-haired man across the ocean. So why do haters hate? Why do they use hate speech online? What are their goals? Sometimes they like to suggest that we have to act now against the government, or against any other political parties or leaders, or against the media, or of course against refugees or foreigners or people who believe differently than they do. Others like to provide credibility for themselves when they go online and publish their hate, or they'd like to evoke negative emotions and sentiments against others. But should this be prohibited, or could this be prohibited? Thinking of this, Germany formed a new law, which I would like to briefly introduce you to. This is our Federal Minister of Justice, and he introduced a bill which roughly translates as network enforcement law. This word doesn't make sense in English, and it also doesn't make sense in German, and it's a very long word, and I think it contains enough consonants could be easily mistaken as being Polish. So what is this law supposed to do? The idea behind the law is that most of the hate speech online can be found in social networking services. And the providers of such services may be in the possession of the tools to get rid of the content and to deal with it or to manage it in a quick and, well, in a good way. So the law addresses these social networking services. And the idea is, or the aim is to fight criminal hate speech and other illegal content online. And to do this, social networking services shall remove certain illegal material quickly in an effective and transparent procedure. And also they should deliver extensive reports on what they do when they deal with hate speech. And if they fail to do so, the authorities can impose fines of up to 50 million euros, which is a sum that also the likes of Facebook don't want to have. Now, there has been a very lively debate about this law, and if it is against the Constitution or if it also has problems with European laws. And the criticism about towards this law brought together a very rather a new coalition, or a unusual coalition of people who formed or who published a declaration on freedom of expression. The people behind this declaration consisted of civil rights activists and journalists and researchers, but also industry representatives and politicians from all kinds of parties. And they voiced their concerns that this new law could be a threat to the freedom of expression, and by imposing such high fines, the law could force Facebook and other social networking services simply to delete on site and don't think too much of the question whether the content in question is really illegal or not. So after a very intensive debate on this law, it passed the German parliament just before the summer break. And after the summer break, everybody returned to their usual business, and we don't speak about this law anymore, interestingly enough, taking into account how heated up the debate was and how high the levels of criticism were. The law will be in force from the beginning of next month, and from the beginning of next year, the companies are requested to deliver these extensive reports on what they do with hate speech online. Having in mind all the valuable criticism towards this law, I have to say I quite like the idea of these reports, because thinking about hate speech, nobody really knows how big the problem is and how much hate is really out there. And whenever we and other colleagues do monitorings and try to find certain illegal content online, we always find some, but the quantities are rather small, and nobody really knows how much is out there, except maybe Facebook does, because they know how much reports from their users they get, they know how much of the content they really delete, in what categories these contents fall. So the social networking services could maybe enrich the debate on hate speech by delivering these reports. So we are very much looking forward to them, and I think a lot of researchers do too. We would now like to leave the legal part and have a closer look at the civic engagement and the initiatives that have been formed in Germany and other countries across Europe to counter hate speech and to fight this phenomenon and to help people to communicate with each other in a in an appropriate and well, kind way. I'd like to acquaint you with 3 different online initiatives, two of them being international ones, and one is a very special German one. I'd like to begin with the No Hate Speech movement, which is a youth campaign of the Council of Europe for Human Rights Online. And the idea is to reduce the acceptance of hate speech online and to develop youth participation and citizenship. And the No Hate Speech movement publishes websites that collect information on hate speech, and it encourages debate that is based on facts rather than on emotions and sentiments or prejudices. It also calls for participation and active engagement and calls these elements the key to encourage young people to speak up for a respectful atmosphere online. The No Hate Speech movement in Germany collects memes, which some of them I've brought along, simply to raise awareness of how stupid and biased arguments can be. But there may be a downside. Making fun of haters can make them maybe even more aggressive. So it's a difficult question. I'm not so sure if it's a good approach. I think the good people in a discussion would very much like these memes and would like to make fun of haters, but I'm not so sure if you maybe achieve the opposite with the haters. But it's nonetheless an idea or an initiative that brought together a lot of fine people. Fine people across Europe. Each heart represents one branch of the No Hate Speech movement. And as you can see, it's not only across Europe, but also across countries which are close to Europe. The German branch is supported by a lot of celebrities and YouTube stars, also by famous politicians. One of them is here. She is the former minister of Family Affairs, and now the minister-president of one of our federal states. Or also here, this kind gentleman you may recognize as the company's co-host, and he's also in support of this movement. This is the Polish branch of the No Hate Speech movement. Maybe some of the faces are familiar for some of you too. In a comparable way, we find these initiatives or the branches of this No Hate Speech movement across Europe. My second example is an initiative we started together with YouTube. In German, it's called Nicht egal, which is rather rough to translate to English. So I've brought along what I think could be a good Polish translation. I'm not so sure. The idea is to bring together famous YouTube stars and give them or ask them to speak up against hate speech and encourage their followers, their millions of followers, to think about hate speech and to act well in a reasonable way and refrain from using hate speech online. Also, this initiative has called young people to participate in a video challenge, and there are also workshops across the country to spread the word. In the last month, there have been more than 22 famous YouTube stars, and they are really the most famous ones. So the press department of YouTube did a terrific job to bring together these very famous YouTube creators. I think most of them are famous with teenagers, and people of my age maybe have a hard time to identify more than 2 or 3 of them. But all of them publish videos on their channels speaking about hate speech, and some of them taking almost a scientific approach and explaining what hate speech is and what to do about it. Some of them taking a rather straightforward approach and talk the language or speak the language they always use when they talk about their new clothes they present, or if they speak about music or so. And using this normal language, they are quite successful in reaching their followers. The workshops in schools I already mentioned. Up to now, they have taken place in more than 40 schools, and the idea is to reach not only the people in these schools, but also to encourage them to speak to their friends and to their neighbors in other classes, in other schools, and even in other cities. This YouTube initiative is also part of an of a worldwide initiative, which is called Creators for Change. Interestingly enough, it started first in Germany, and then only a week later they announced this international initiative. The reason for this is a bit obscure, but maybe YouTube found that Germany was a good country to start this initiative because the debate was there on such a high level. My third example is called I Am Here. I Am Here is basically an initiative on Facebook to improve the culture of debate in discussion groups and other social networks. It basically consists of a Facebook groups with nearly 40,000 members. And these members share links to spots anywhere on the internet where the discussion currently heats up. And they encourage others to engage in the discussions and participate in a respectful manner based on facts and not based on sentiments. This initiative is quite successful, and each morning you can find in this group links to the famous news sites which have published any news over the night, and some of them have still their comments section, and as soon as the topic which this news article deals with can be only the slightest bit controversial, then you can wait only a couple of minutes and find the discussion heating up. A lot of people come together and don't participate by using facts or factual arguments, but only with well, negative sentiments and very strong emotions. So the idea of I Am Here is to bring together the others and bring the good people or the people who are interested in exchanging views based on fact and bring them to the spots where the discussion is heating up at the moment. I couldn't forget our educational resources. A couple of years ago we started the Media Goes to School project. We have developed until now almost a dozen different materials for schools, ranging from coding and programming to the production of online news. And the most recent ones deal with hate speech, and I've brought along them here. One is about democracy and hate, and the other is about designing or maybe forming opinion online. We provide this open educational resources together with very fine partners, and they are very successful. We find they are downloaded very often, and we try to address most recent developments and topics where we find teachers are lacking the correct or the good materials or the most updated materials. Sometimes because the printing companies who provide the school books aren't quick enough, or it's too difficult to integrate the most recent developments in their materials. And we find that we can be, together with our partners, be a bit quicker and provide just the materials that the teachers are looking for. And I'm sure you'll agree that the more young people know about media and how to use it in a good way and how to deal with its risks, the less likely they maybe are to become haters themselves. Before I say thank you very much to you, I'd like to say thank you very much for the interpreters who are doing a terrific job yesterday and also today and help us to come to terms with your wonderful but sometimes very difficult language. So thank you to you and thank you to everybody.